view of accountancy. From this point of view, we have to take some accounting related question. If these resources are invisible, do they really exist or not? If yes, how can we present them in the balance sheet? And how can we measure it or evaluate them? Or do they meet the criteria of fair valuation? How can we fulfill the requirements? The aim of the IFRS financial statement is to give useful information for the potential investors about the financial position and the financial performance of the company. And I really think I fully understand that this kind of resources has got a great part in the financial position of these entities. The IASB, the International Accounting Standard Board, stated that using appropriate IFRSs ensure to meet this requirement. So the International Accounting Standard 38, IAS 38, give us some rules in connection with the intangible assets, and the IAS 36 will give us guidance how to handle the impairment of these intangible assets. But what were the facts or faults which lead to debate in connection with the balance sheet recognition of these kind of invisible resources? Some experts were convinced that in order to reach a true, reliable, or trustful picture about the company, we cannot omit these kind of items from the balance sheet. We need them. If the entity generates revenues using these kind of assets, we have to face some expenses in connection with them. But some other experts recognize some problems in connection with the recognition or the separation of the invisible resources from the other assets. So they realize a great uncertainty and subjectivity in the evaluation. For example, how long can the useful lifetime be? Or how can we measure the generated future cash flows? We do not know exactly. These are the pro-cons arguments in connection with the invisible assets. So it's obvious that we need, or this field need some common and accepted regulation. The International Accounting Standard Board requires some compulsory lines in the balance sheet. So we have to create individual line for the intangible assets if and only if the company can control these kind of resources and they are reliably measurable. We have to open an individual separate line in the balance sheet, and we have to separate these kind of items from the other kinds of assets. So if we would like to decide about the accounting settlement of these kind of assets, we have to take some questions. There's a hierarchy of decisions. We have to answer if this item is an asset or not. Not all assets and liabilities should be recognized in the balance sheet. We know that they are existing, but they won't be part of the balance sheet. If these are assets, we know that we can control these kind of assets, but the value of some of them may be so difficult to measure. This is why we have to omit them from the balance sheet. And sometimes, if we know that we own these kind of assets, we know that we have to to indicate them in the balance sheet, but we do not know how should it be measured. That can be the main problem in connection with the invisible resources. In the framework of the IFRSs, there's an asset definition. An asset can be recognized if a resource controlled by the enterprise as a result of past events occurs and from which future economic benefits are expected to flow to the enterprise. An item shouldn't be recognized as an intangible asset unless it meets the requirements of the standards. So if we do not have the possibility to recognize as an asset, all other expenses are all the remaining costs. But what does it mean controlled by the entity? Legally enforceable right is the evidence of the control. So we have to prove our right to use these kind of assets in a way when you want. For example, if you think about the skills of staffs or the skills of employees, the company cannot control the skills of employees. Or with another example, the market shares or the customer loyalty is not under the control of the company. So we have to prove this control in order to handle these kind of assets as part of the balance sheet. The next part is the measure of all of them. So we need some proof in connection with the future economic benefit. We have to measure them. We have to hope and calculate the future economic benefits coming from these kind of assets. The IAS 38 gives us some definition of the intangible assets. The IASB refers to an intangible asset as an identifiable non-monetary asset without physical substance. So the IAS 38 objective is to prescribe the accounting treatment of these kind of assets. An intangible asset may be identifiable if we can separate them from the other kinds of assets and from the goodwill as well. We can identify them if we can sell them, we can buy them, we can transfer them or license them separately whenever we want. Non-monetary means that we can have benefits from these kind of assets without converting to cash immediately. We can use it and generate other profits later in long term. The interesting point is the physical substance, because intangible assets can sometimes include physical elements as well. For example, copyrights and customers list and patent documentation get printed onto paper. So this piece of paper is a tangible asset, but the asset's value lies in the copyrights or in the patents, not on that piece of paper it is printed onto. We have to separate the tangible part from the intangible part, and we have to determine what part has got the great value. In the IAS 38, we can find some examples in connection with the intangible assets. For example, the patented technology, computer softwares, databases, trademarks, internet domains, video and audiovisual materials, customers list, import quotas, customer and supply relationship include customers list. I try to highlight the customer and supplier relationship because based on this point, I try to put emphasis on the meaning of these kind of invisible assets. We need some alignment point. These kind of intangible assets, such as customer or supplier relationship, they do not meet the criteria of the asset. Why? We can control our customer? Obviously not. We can measure reliably how much will be the future economic benefits of our customers or supplier relationship? Of course not. They hasn't got a value if we create these kind of lists and relationships. We cannot measure reliably. We cannot know how much does it worth for the company if we would like to write on a paper the names of our customers. But we can have many kinds of intangible assets. When we buy it, we can measure them reliably. When the Alibaba notes or IFRS financial statements contains these kind of intangible assets, we can see many kinds of intangible assets. The user base or customer relationships, as I mentioned before, the trade names, trademarks, domain names, non-compete agreements, developed technologies and patents, and the license copyrights as well. Many kinds of intangible assets can have a value for the company. But as I mentioned before, if we write the list of the customers, there's no worth of it. The evidence of the reliable value will be the acquisition of another company. So when you buy it, the seller can create its price based on the fact that he trusts in the value of the customers and the customers list. So the purchase price can be a great proof of the value of the intangible asset. This is why it's so important, the notes part of the IFRS financial statement, because the potential investors can get acquainted with all the facts which can determine the value of these kind of assets. We can read here that during the year end 2020, 21, and 22, the company acquired intangible assets, respectively, in connection with business combination, which were measured at fair value upon acquisition. Why is it so important for us? Because that is the proof of the value of the customer relationship. That company bought another one, purchased another one. Why? Because they need not only the net assets of that company, but the value of the customer's relationship. They needed the user base or the trade names and so on. So the purchase price is a reliable value. When we write it on a paper ourselves, there's no value of these kind of assets. But we buy it, we can realize it in the purchase price. It will be a good proof for the value. Some items may be assets, but are not to be recognized as such because it's not probable that benefits will flow to the business or not. We cannot measure them reliably. These can be the pre-operating expenses. They are not an asset. These can be the publicity. It cannot be capitalized as well. It cannot be a asset in our balance sheet, or the setup cost of a company. They are not a asset in the frame of the IFRS. It's so important to state that that is the rule of the IFRS, because, for example, in Hungary, setup cost can be capitalized. So in some national accounting rules, there are other regulations. For example, in the case of the setup cost, Hungary can capitalize these kind of items. We cannot capitalize the research expenditures as well. The research expenditures are not assets in the frame of the IFRS. But other intangibles can be capitalized. They can be part of the balance sheet. For example, the development expenditures. Why is it so important for us? What is the difference between the R&D, the research and development? It's so important because many companies has got R&D activities and great value. So we have to separate this research phase and the development phase of the R&D activities. Investigation of new gain or new scientific or technological knowledge will be part of the research phase. For example, activities aimed to obtain new knowledge or the search for alternatives of products or processes or systems, they will be research. Research costs should therefore be written off as an expense as they are incurred in the PR part of the statement of comprehensive income. It will be loss for the company. It will be part of the profit or loss statement. But what about the development phase of the R&D activities? The development will be the commercial application of the early research phase. So it's a design or construction or testing the pre-productions or the pre-use prototypes, or these can be designs of tools or designs of new technologies and so on, or the pilot plans. These are in the development phase of the R&D activities. When you realize development expenditures, and these kind of expenditures will meet certain criteria. For example, there's an identifiable project that is technically feasible, commercially viable, and so on, and we can finance them. We have to indicate them in the assets part of the balance sheet. They can be capitalized. The R&D activities have got significant role in the case of the pharmaceutical companies. So in the case of these kind of companies, we can find goodwill in the balance sheet because they've got many subsidiaries all over the world, but we can find intangible assets as well. For example, rights or capitalized development cost, as we mentioned before. But we can find research and development expenditures in the statement of comprehensive income as well. Why? Because the research part of the R&D activities cannot be capitalized. They will be part of the PL. They will be expenses for the company. And those development activities which are not met the criteria, they will be part of the PL as well. We have to omit them from the balance sheet, and we have to put this kind of development cost to the PL part of the statement of comprehensive income. Every pharmaceutical companies, such as, for example, the GlaxoSmithKline or the Aegis, try to have many kinds of activities in order to find new technologies, new vaccines, and new medicines. This is why it's so important to make a differentiation between the research and the development part of the R&D activities. In the case of the internally generated brands, internally generated titles and lists, as we mentioned before in the case of the customers list, there are many, many problems in the valuation. So if a company itself tries to create something, a brand names, a publishing titles, or a player's right, a football player's right, this cannot be capitalized because the value is too difficult to determine unless they have been bought from somebody else, because the purchase price is the best proof of this kind of valuation. The standard prohibits the recognition of the internally generated brands, publishing titles, and so on, because these all fail to meet one or more criteria from the definition. Okay, let's see an example about the player's right, because we can handle this kind of topic so easily. If the original value or the original football club cannot measure the value of the football player of a kid, because the football player hasn't got value in the previous or the original club, we cannot give a real value for the kids who were playing that club from the age of 5 to 14. There's no value. But if a company would like to sell this player and we realize the purchase price, that will be the value of this football player to the other company. We can see many, many examples day after day in the newspapers or in the news as well. For example, I'm Hungarian, so our most famous football player is Szoboszlai Dominik, who is playing for Liverpool today. And the value of this football player is so high for the Liverpool. But for the original club, the original Hungarian club who brought this player up, there wasn't any value of this player in the balance sheet because he was internally generated football player's right. So it's really interesting because these kind of invisible assets, such as the rights and the lists and titles for the brands, has got a great value in the balance sheet of these kind of clubs or companies. We can handle them. We have to handle them. The other side of the internally generated items in the balance sheet will be in connection with the goodwill. When increase in value of the company itself caused by the loyalty of the customers or the increasing skills of staff, that will be part of the company internally generated goodwills. They cannot be capitalized by the company itself. We cannot write goodwill in our balance sheet when we increase the loyalty of our customers, when we ourselves increase the value of the skills of the employees, because we cannot measure them reliably. In the Samsung Electronics notes, we can find some precious information in connection with the intangible assets. We can see there a movement table from the beginning of the year till the end of the year, and we can see the balance. This company has got intellectual property rights, development costs, memberships, and goodwills as well. Intellectual property rights and memberships came from external acquisitions, and we can see the internally generated items line in the movement table without any value. So this company tried to to show to the potential investors that they've got many internationally generated items, but they cannot capitalize them in the balance sheet because of the rules of the IFRS. They've got precious and determined internally generated items with own values, but it can be capitalized based on the rules of the IFRS. When we purchase something, there's a value of it. So some intangible assets are purchased separately and have a real cost. For example, if a company could buy the right to use a brand and to use it for a particular period, they've got a clear market value, and these kind of assets can be part of the balance sheet. We can put them in the balance sheet because of the reliable, measurable values. Some words about the computer softwares. If we purchase a computer software, it can be capitalized. Operating system for hardware will be included in the hardware cost. If we try to create computer softwares ourselves, it will be internally developed and charged to expense until technologically feasible, probable future economic benefits, intent, and ability to use or sell the software, resources to complete the software, and ability to measure the cost. So we cannot capitalize the internally developed computer software until it meets the requirement of the development, until it meets the criteria of the asset definition. But after it, we can capitalize as we can measure it. So we can measure the material cost of the own production, the personal cost of the own production, and the depreciation of the used machinery. When we can summarize all of our costs, and after it will be technically feasible, commercially viable, and so on, it can be part of the balance sheet. We can put these kind of items to the balance sheet. I think that the case of the computer softwares is good because that is the most simple invisible item which can be capitalized. And we have to see the meaning of the goodwill as well, because the goodwill will be part of the intangible asset, is part of the intangible assets, but it's a special kind of intangible assets. We have to indicate them in a separate line in the balance sheet. We can have goodwill from business acquisitions or business combinations. In our globalized world, it's not unusual that a company is operating in many countries all over the world. They can acquire subsidiaries and joint ventures and other associate companies from all over the world. They would like to buy not only the net assets of these kind of companies, but they would like to buy the reputation or the customers of the subsidiaries. This is why they can pay more than the value of the net assets of this company. The balance of the purchase cost in excess of the identified net asset will be the goodwill. The goodwill is created by the good relationship or situation of the purchase company, by building up a reputation or throughout the personality or the attitude of the employees, of the staff, and so on. The buyer intended to pay more than the value of the net assets of this company, because they realize some invisible resources. Goodwill acquired in a business combination. The standard for it is the IFRS 3. So the goodwill is recognized as an asset. After initial recognition, goodwill will be measured with impairment, but not will be amortized. We are the investor company. We would like to buy the control of other companies. We would like to buy more than 50% of other companies because we would like to control that company. We would like to get access to the reputation or to the customers list of that company. We would like to buy the loyal customers or the list of customers or the loyalty of the customers, the relationships, suppliers, or other relationships in order to make more profit. We buy a hope to generate more profit having this kind of company. So summarizing the recognition part of the intangible asset, we can say that there are many examples of capitalized intangible assets. We can find many kinds of intangible assets in the balance sheet. For example, software development costs, other development costs, purchase patents, license, trademarks and brands, and the purchase goodwills as well. We recognized all of these items at cost, which will contain the purchase price and all production cost and all other costs related to the asset till it's ready to use. In the case of the follow-up measurement, we can say that after the initial recognition, we have to deal with the reduction in the value. We have to take into consideration the wearing out, the depreciation, and the loss of value, the sudden loss of value, that will be the impairment. How can we put the intangible assets to the balance sheet? Based on the net book value. So starting from the initial value, less the depreciation and less the impairment, we will get the net book value, and the balance sheet will contain the intangible assets based on the net book value. The depreciation of the intangible assets has got some specialties caused by the special characteristics of the intangible assets. We have to determine the useful life of the intangible assets. We have to make a differentiation between the finite and the indefinite useful life. In the case of the finite useful life, we have to calculate the scrap value, the residual value, and in the case of the intangible assets, we will use the straight line method for the depreciation. But in the case of the indefinite useful life, there's no depreciation. But what does it mean, a finite or an indefinite useful life? The estimation of the life of an intangible asset may be particularly difficult, unless the intangible depends on a fixed term legal right. If we realize a fixed term legal right, if this asset has got a finite useful life, we have to allocate the depreciable amount on a systematic basis over its useful life, using the straight line method. They've got finite useful life. It means, for example, a 5 years contract. In the notes of the PT Telecom, we can find a summary of the significant accounting policies in the case of the intangible assets. Intangible assets, except goodwill, are amortized using the straight-line method, as I mentioned before, based on estimated useful lives of the intangible assets as follows. In the case of the software, they calculate with 3 to 6 years of useful lifetime. In the case of the license, 3 to 20 years of useful lifetime. And in the case of other intangible assets, 1 to 30 years of useful lifetime. They can calculate depreciation because there's a finite useful lifetime of these kind of assets. They can determine the finite useful lifetime. But if an intangible asset has got indefinite useful life, when there's no foreseeable limit to the period of the expected net cash flow generation, it cannot be depreciated. There's no depreciation in the case of the indefinite useful life. What does it mean? I try to highlight it with an example. If in the contract of a football player or in the contract of the franchise right, there's no foreseeable limit. There's no 5 years period indicated in the contract. There's no depreciation because we do not know the exact time in which we can depreciate or allocate the depreciable amount over it. So if in the contract of the football player, we can find a 5 years term, we can depreciate. But if it can be extended for more 10 years or for 3 years and so on, we cannot see the limit. We cannot see the end of the useful lifetime. This is why we cannot have the opportunity to calculate depreciation. But we can make an impairment test if it's required, or if there's some injury of the football player, a sudden damage, we can make an impairment loss. We can calculate an impairment loss in the PL. So we can validate a loss in the value of these kind of rights if we can realize a sign, external or internal sign of the impairment, of the loss of his value, but it's not depreciation, not an allocated or planned depreciation. I would like to deal with the Manchester United annual report. The Manchester United is a European and English football club, and they are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, so they have not the opportunity, but the obligation to prepare their financial statements based on the IFRSs. They've got many experience in determining the values of the invisible assets. In the balance sheet of the Manchester United Football Club, we can find intangible assets, players' registration and other intangible assets. And we can see in the notes that the costs associated with the acquisition of the players' registration are capitalized at fair value. So we can find players' registration or players' right in the balance sheet because they bought it. They have a purchase price, which is a proof of the value. But in the case of the intangible assets created by the company itself, they cannot be capitalized. We can read it in the notes of the Manchester United Football Club's consolidated financial statement. They also have trademark registration costs. And they stated that intangible assets with an indefinite useful lifetime, such as extended player contracts, cannot be depreciated under IFRSs. So as I mentioned before, if we can see a damage, a sudden damage, an injury, it will be a sign. In order to calculate the recoverable amount, we will calculate the value in use or the expected selling price. If it's needed, we have to calculate impairment, and we have to written off the impairment loss in the PL part of the statement of comprehensive income. Okay, I do not want to deal with the size. You can see it on the PPT. What kind of size can they be? Okay. In the follow-up evaluation, the companies has got the choice to use the historical cost model or the revaluation model. They can use all of them. In the case of the historical cost model, the companies only calculate depreciation and impairment. But in the case of the revaluation model, they can increase the level of all of their assets, intangible assets, to the market price. That is the meaning of the revaluation. If fair value can be determined by the reference to some kind of market price or market information, such active markets are expected to be uncommon for intangible assets, but in some case we can find real active prices. For example, in the case of the production quotas or fishing licenses or the tax licenses, we can increase the level of our intangible assets to the market prices. That is the meaning of the revaluation. The reason for allowing revaluation of various assets is that we can gather relevant information about the market prices. But we have to face with three practical problems: where to put the revaluation gain, whether to depreciate the revalued assets, and how to measure the gain on sale. Under IAS requirements, the revaluation gains are not part of the PL, the profit or loss part of the statement of comprehensive income, because it's just an estimation. They are not realized yet. This is why they will be just other comprehensive income. Why is it so important to a company? Because they do not have to pay taxes, corporate taxes, after the other comprehensive income part of the statement of comprehensive income. They are not realized revaluations. Okay, under the IAS 38, the settlement for depreciation is obligatory in every case, using every model. In the case of the historical cost model as well, and in the case of the revaluation model as well. We will increase to the market price the value of our intangible asset, and we will calculate the depreciation after the new value, after the revalued item. This is special in the case of the IFRSs. There are some compulsory lines in the statement of comprehensive income as well. That is the revaluation of the property, plant, and equipment and the intangible assets. It's an obligatory line created by the IASB, the International Accounting Standard Board. So we have to indicate all of our impairment loss and depreciation in the net income. And if we use the revaluation model, we have to put the revaluation gain to the other comprehensive income. That is the two possible treatments for the intangible assets, as I mentioned before. You can use all of these models, the historical cost model and the revaluation model as well. The depreciation and the impairment will be parts of all of them, but the revaluation to the market prices will be parts of the revaluation model only. In the case of the revaluation, because these are our assets and we do not want to sell them, mainly we do want to use them. This is why the period for the revaluation is only 3 to 5 years, not annually, not an annual task for the company. We will revalue them 3 to 5 years. In the case of the Manchester United Football Club's notes, we find some information about the revaluation. There's no revaluation of the player's right. Why? Because the contract, the period of the contract is from 3 to 5 years. As we can revalue our assets from 3 to 5 years, there's no indication, motivation for revalue, because the whole period of the contract will cover the revaluation period as well. So that's why the other comprehensive income is missing from the statement of Manchester United Football Club's report. And during my presentation and during the preparation for this meeting, I tried to highlight the consolidated balance sheet of the Manchester United Football Club in order to put emphasis on the value of these kind of intangible assets. As you can see, in 2002, the Manchester United realized 743 million pounds of intangible assets. The total value of the assets is 1,056 million pounds. So the value of the intangible assets is more than 70% of the total assets. The biggest part of the total assets of the Manchester United Football Club came from intangible assets. It's such a big number. This is why we have to deal with the calculation, we have to deal with the evaluation and the recognition topics and difficulties. And at the end of my presentation, and sorry for being a little bit out of my limit, my time limit, but I think it's a really interesting topic and I really like it. But now I would like to put emphasis on some crucial facts. We have to know the growing significance and the value of these kind of invisible resources, and we have to get acquainted with the difficulties in the recognition and the valuation. There's a special treatment of intangible assets in the system of IFRS, and we have to know that these are important information for the investors, because an investor would like to see the whole picture about a company, about all items that he owns or own somebody, with the invisibles, together with the invisibles, because this kind of assets has got values and can give companies a competitive advantage. And what about the trends today? We have to put emphasis on the fact that the application of the artificial intelligence or the ChatGPT is increasing. If we regard the AI as a combination of software, hardware, and database use, it can be modeled combination of tangible and intangible assets. So we have to deal with the AI topics as well later. Day after day, we are facing with new challenges, with new environmental, medical, and other challenges. We have to give new responses to global financial or medical or environmental processes. The pharmaceutical companies try to create new know-hows of vaccines and medicines. They've got very big values in the case of these kind of companies. So this is why it's so important. How can we recognize our invisible resources, and how can we evaluate our invisible resources in the future and in today's economy as well? When we try to put all of this information to the financial statements of a company, it will give us a fair picture, a fair and relevant picture about our company, which can be useful to our investors. And that is the meaning and the aim of the IFRS financial statement, to give useful information for the potential investors. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hey, thank you very much, Doctor. That was a very comprehensive presentation regarding definition, recognition, and measurement of intangible effect based on IFRS. Ladies and gentlemen, after we get a very invaluable insight from our speaker today, now it is time to have a question and answer session. So we will now invite a question from our webinar participants. We advise participants to submit the question through the chat, or you may please use the hand raise feature. Turn on your camera, unmute your speakers, and introduce yourself briefly before posing your question. Previously, I have checked there is a first question from Mr. Sungsang De Marwanto. Allow me to read, Doctor. Miss, is goodwill currently an intangible asset? Because based on IFRS 3, goodwill is no longer amortized, but is subject to an impairment test, while intangible assets are amortized. Thank
you. We can calculate impairment in the case of the goodwill if we run an impairment test in the case of the subsidiaries, and we can see that the market price of our shares is lower. We can calculate an impairment. It's a loss for the parent company, for the holding company. That's right. But there's no depreciation, just impairment when we realize some external sign that our subsidiary lost in his value. That's right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Very point here. And then there's a second question from Ibu Devi. In case of online transportation company, which is categorized as unicorn in Indonesia, the company has recorded intangible assets or goodwill, which is 93.84 trillion rupiah from total assets. The total asset is 155 trillion as of dated on the end of December in 2021. The company then entered the National Stock Exchange in 2022. After the IPO, the stock price declined slowly and up to this day never reached IPO price. So the question is, do the company recorded the goodwill incorrectly? Do intangible assets have direct impact to profit and loss? Okay, Doctor, there are two questions about this situation.
Sorry, if I would like to hear the question again or to see it in the chat side, it can be better for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on the column chat, Doctor?
Yeah. It's good. Yeah. Because in this case, everyone can see it.
Yeah, of course.
There was an initial public offering of the shares, and
Goodwill is very interesting topic for this
yeah.
person. Yeah.
Okay. The goodwill is determined in the case of the acquisition of other companies, and only if. So we can find the goodwill in the balance sheet of the acquiring company. If we buy the controlling shares of other company and we paid more than the net asset value of this company, that can be part of the goodwill. It's a kind of intangible asset, but it's not part of the profit or loss statement. Just the goodwill, the excess, the purchase price excess over the net assets value of the acquired company. It's in the case of the business combinations. So if a company buy other companies from all over the world, subsidiaries from all over the world, they can realize that goodwill. The goodwill can lose in value to zero. It's an impairment loss for the company, which will be part in the profit and loss statement, but there's no depreciation cost. But what I would like to emphasize is that after reaching the 0 point of the value of the goodwill and the reputation and the value of the shares of the subsidiaries will increase, we do not recreate or increase the value of the goodwill, because in this case, that will be internally generated one. So when the reputation or other parts of the acquired company will increase after the acquisition, it will be internally generated. So it won't be goodwill as well. Goodwill can generate it in the point in time of the acquisition and just the acquisition. So in the case of the IPO, when the company would like to sell his shares to the market, that is the first point. They can realize goodwill at the first time of the acquisition. I don't know if you can accept my explanation or not, but that is the meaning of the goodwill. We cannot realize goodwill in the acquisition of the joint venture or the associate companies, just in the case of the subsidiaries, when the parent company or the holding company control the acquired company.
Okay, get it, doctor. So we have to define first the goodwill, then after that, we could conclude it how to impairment or to classify the goodwill for the further reclassification in financial statement. Okay, Ibu Dewi, do you have anything to, for the confirmation from Dr. Orvas? Okay, I think that's enough, yeah. I will be checking on the next question in the chat column. We have another one, the third question, doctor. Allow me to read it for you. Miss, how do we differentiate intellectual capital from intangible assets in the university? From Ayu Rencana.
Intellectual capital has got many kinds of meaning. If you think to the intangible asset as invisible resources, the intellectual capital is it, an invisible resources, which has got a great value, but we cannot measure it reliably. This is why the IASB do not mention the intellectual capital, because the valuation is so difficult. There's no intellectual capital in the balance sheet, just in the value of the goodwill. So that is the same process. When we would like to buy the intellectual capital of the university, and the company would like to buy the university because they would like to control the intellectual capital, and they would like to pay more than the value of the net assets of the university. Why? Because they need the intellectual capital of the university. They will be reflected, the intellectual capital will be reflected in the price. So we cannot identify intellectual capital in the balance sheet as a special or separate item. It's not identifiable and not measurable reliably. But if somebody would like to buy another company for the intellectual capital, and they would like to pay more than the value of the net assets, the real value of everything that he owns, for example, the buildings, the inventories, and so on, and they would like to pay more, the value of the intellectual capital will be reflected in the goodwill. That will be part of the goodwill.
Okay, thank you.
But there's no intellectual capital, separate intellectual capital.
I think it is related with the question from Ayuran Sana, is their first question previously. Can we recognize intellectual capital in the balance sheet?
Yeah, that was in connection with the goodwill.
Yes.
No, in a separate line, we cannot identify intellectual capital in the balance sheet. Just in the parts of the goodwill, if we would like to buy something for another company for the intellectual capital, it will be parts of the goodwill. And goodwill has to be in an individual line in the balance sheet. And I can see the next question as well. And I have to say, yes, the goodwill in this case is not amortized, such as the land or the sculptures, for example, or the paintings or anything else. Yes, that's right.
So if I don't misinterpret your information, doctor, the definition is back to the measurable. Yeah, as long as the goodwill is measurable, could be measured precisely, then it could be stated in the balance sheet. That's correct.
Yeah. Yes.
That's a clear explanation from doctor. Thank you very much. Let's see if there is another question in the chat column. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a participant who would like to ask question directly, you may raise your hand. For those who still have something in mind, we invite you. We have a rare opportunity to discuss with Dr. Orban today. Okay, we are still waiting in the column chat. Doctor, may I ask you something?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a very interesting topic about this intangible asset, because it does not exist. Yeah, we cannot. It's just very difficult. Yeah, to measure. There is difficulties in the recognition and valuation. That statement that I got from your slide. how we overcome these difficulties as a company. Even though we read IFRS, we know the timeline, but sometimes it is difficult to follow. Do you think, do you have any strategy that how do we overcome these difficulties?
Yes,
And
you're
also,
right.
Mhm.
And
and
also,
also, actually, we are. I am right now in this doctoral program. Maybe you can share our future research topic regarding this IVF, perhaps in the future, in future research, what kind of topics we can do in the future regarding this untenable effect. Maybe you can share from your experience and previous research that you already make publication.
okay, so I think that there's so many difficulties, as you mentioned, in the case of the recognition of these kind of assets. In the practice of the companies, I can see that they try to find some steps in order to identify all what they have. So they try to identify the list, the rights, the patents, the copyrights, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of every kind of items, they try to determine if they can give a real value to them or not. They can determine the useful lifetime or not. So there are so many aspects of this evaluation. And some companies try to follow the international tendencies, but all international tendencies are in connection with the IFRSs. So the basis for the evaluation is the framework of the IFRSs and the standard. So they try to give a real value based on the standard. If somebody has got practical problem in connection with the evaluation, they can ask questions to the International Accounting Standard Board. There's an interpretation committee who has the obligation and the responsibility to answer to the practical questions.
That was a very detailed answer, Doctor. So we should follow the process and then consult also the condition of the company. Yeah. Okay, another question we have from the participant from Pariatni Wira. How about your? I'm sorry. Yeah. How about your opinion relationship between intangible assets and firm performance and firm value? Maybe we could correlate this with the future research, Doctor.
Intangible assets and what?
Firm performance and firm value. The relationship between intangible assets and firm performance and firm value.
I cannot find it. Sorry, but
okay. The participant asking is about your opinion. What is the relationship between intangible assets and firm performance and firm value?
I cannot share the second one. The intangible assets and
firm performance and firm value. This is from Pariatni Wira.
Because I can see the research and development. Okay. It's my opinion. So if a company realize that they've got many intangible assets, the value of the company can be higher. How can we use this higher value in the world, in the real world? If something has got a value, the customers can pay more. So it can increase the level of the firm performance or the firm value. For example, if we use and have got a real well-established or easily recognizable brand, for example, the Tommy Hilfiger flag, if we have this kind of brand, it can help to reach the wider customer base. It can give the opportunity to create a higher price, to reach the, I don't know, richest people of the customers, and to generate more sales, to generate more profits, and so on. It can give the opportunity to the companies to charge higher prices in the market, and it can increase the level of the firm value. If a company has got many intangible assets and the best reputation, it can be an important source of the strong competitive advantage, I think. And it will increase the level of the firm value as well. About the firm performance, we have to analyze what does it mean, the firm performance. If it means financial performance and based on the profit or loss of the company, we can see the connection between the intangible assets and the financial indicators, because based on these kind of brands and values, we can create a higher revenue, we can reach a higher revenue, a higher profit, and it will modify the firm performance and the firm value. If we create an own brand, which is internally generated, and there's no value in the balance sheet of this brand, because I am the Tommy Hilfiger and I have my brand of Tommy Hilfiger, I know that there's a value of the brand, but I cannot realize this value. But if I would like to sell my company, I will require a higher price in the market for my company. So that will increase the firm value.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. I think we all agree, yeah, the intangible asset will increase the value of the firm, even though in the long term, yeah, the long term, it will increase
This meeting is being recorded.
Listed on the stock exchanges, and they need financial sources from all over the world. So this system is created for the bigger companies who need extra financial resources, financial sources. So this is why we have to deal with the financial topics of and financing sources of these kind of companies. In this part of the world has got many financial institutions. So the system cannot make a differentiation between the companies and the financial institutions. The standards are the same for all of them. The banking system and the financial institutions and so on, they have the same task, using the standards and creating the value of the intangible assets and the invisible resources, but these are the same topic and the same difficulties. These financial institutions are listed on the stock exchanges in Hungary as well, and in the member states of the European Union as well. So they have to face with the same problems and the same standards. They have to do the same in preparing their financial statements. There is no specialties in this case. Just they have to deal with special financial instrument standards such as IFRS 9, which will give us some regulation. How can they handle the financial assets or the financial liabilities or the equity instruments in the balance sheet? But in the case of the intangible assets, their problems are the same, and such as the other companies. There's no specialties in the case of the financial institutions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. It means there is no differences here in the treatment, even though in the financial industry, as long as they are listed in the capital market. Okay, for the next question. Yes, Doctor. Actually, this is also a student from University of Debrecen, from Made Estianti, PhD student. I'm very interested in this topic due to my difficulty in doing startup valuation, especially in the early stage of startup growth, especially digital startup. What do you think about it? It is Indonesian students.
In the case of the startup companies, the big value is the knowledge, is the know-how of their items. So they have got a big value of the invisible resources, but they cannot put it in the balance sheet, because the aim of the startup companies is to create something new. It's an internally generated product. Why is it good? Because in the case of the startup, they try to find an angel, a business angel, who can give some money to this business. But the angel aim is to put this company to the market. And if this company has got many invisible resources with a higher value of it, they can reach a higher price of the shares of the startup company. So I think that the meaning of the startup is to create something new. If it's the value of the invisible resources later in time, they can realize some profit based on the invisible resources. But these kind of resources, the know-hows and the brands and so on, cannot be part of the balance sheet of these startup companies.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Hopefully it is clear enough for Ibu ST. If it doesn't clear enough, she maybe go to your office in Hungary Actually,
Yeah.
right now and to discuss
We can discuss this topic personally. Of
to
course.
overcome the difficulties. Yeah, maybe to doing
Yeah.
the dissertation. Okay, doctor.
It can be part of the PhD
Part of the
dissertation.
PhD dissertation. Okay, thank you, doctor. I proceed with the next question from Ibu Nurhalisa. Most intangible assets are deductible from regulatory capital, while tangible assets are generally not deductible. Are leasing assets recognized under the new lease accounting standards, LOU assets, tangible or intangible assets?
Sorry, but I couldn't hear it. Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah, I repeat it once again. Most intangible assets are deductible from regulatory capital, while tangible assets are generally not deductible. Are leasing assets recognized under the new lease accounting standard, LOU assets, tangible or intangible assets?
Mm-hmm. Just a minute. I could find it, so I read it as well. Okay. Thank you for the question. The IFRS 16 is a relatively new standard for giving some regulation of the lessees or the lessee assets. The framework stated that if a company controls an asset, it has to be part of the balance sheet. So if we own that asset or we lease this asset, doesn't matter, we have to put it in the balance sheet. The IFRS 16, the new standard, created a new category. That is the right of use asset. The right of use asset means that we have a right to use a machinery or a car or a land and so on. And it's a kind of right. And the question is very good because this right is an intangible asset. But we have got the possibility, the opportunity to choose between the tangible assets and the intangible asset. We can put these kind of items, the right of use asset, into the intangible assets, or we can identify them among the tangible assets as well, because that is the meaning. It's a right, it's an intangible asset, but it's in connection with another tangible asset, so it can be part of the tangible assets as well. Why is it so important? Because in the case of the right of use asset, we can calculate the depreciation as it is a tangible. So you're right. Thank you very much for your opinion, because it's a new and special standard. The other fresh and new information in the case of the IFRS 16 and in the case of the lessees is that standard hasn't made differentiation between the financial lease and the operating lease. From the point of view of the lessee, that will be a set in the balance sheet. Doesn't matter if it's a financial lease or an operating lease. We have to put this asset to the asset side of the balance sheet among the intangible assets or among the tangible assets. But it will be deductible as a tangible. It's a very good question and a very complex question. It's a relatively new standard. So if somebody would like to write a thesis in this topic or write a PhD in this topic, it's quite a good topic for it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Congratulations for the question.
Thank you for the detailed answer, Doctor, and also the recommendation for the future research about this matter. We have one question in the chat section. It is from Palangkaraya University. It is quite far from Bali, Doctor. From Gita Surya Mapau. My question is, what is your opinion of made a financial statement? Do all kind of company must comply international accounting standard for making a financial statement? Thank you.
Okay. The system of IFRS is created in 1973 by the International Accounting Standard Committee, which was restructured to International Accounting Standard Board in 2001. In connection with the financial crisis. So this new organization stated that the IFRS system is useful for the bigger companies. So the European Union, based on the regulation of 1606 in 2002, that was the European Union directive, the European Union obliged every listed companies in every European member states stock exchanges to prepare their financial statements, their consolidated financial statements in connection with the IFRSs. But it is obligatory for the bigger one, only for the bigger companies. And the European Union give the opportunity to the member states, if they would like to widen, to extend this obligation to the other companies, smaller ones. In Hungary, there are other groups of companies who can use the IFRS reports, who can prepare their financial statements based on the IFRSs. But for this kind of companies, it's just an option. In my opinion, the very small businesses, the small and medium-sized businesses won't prepare their financial statements based on this system. Why? Because it's a huge amount of paper, huge regulation. So for for the shop in the corner of my street, it's a huge and very difficult regulation system. They won't use this system. It's my opinion, just my opinion. What is obvious is nowadays this system is only obligatory for the bigger companies who are listed on the stock exchanges. But 9 from the 10 biggest stock exchanges all over the world accept IFRS reports, namely the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the American one, Australia, and so on, the French and the Germany one, use and accept IFRS reports. Only the Stock Exchange of the United States of America oblige the USA companies to prepare their financial statements based on the US GAAP, that is the United States generally accepted accounting principles. So this is obligatory for the American firms, but the Stock Exchange of the United States of America can accept the IFRS reports of the other countries.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Apparently, we still have anonymous question or topic to be discussed. However, due to the limited time, we need to end
Yeah.
our discussion session, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, before I close this session, I would like to invite Doctor. Are there any final thoughts before we end today's session? Would like to share with us your final thoughts as a closing remark before we end the discussion session?
I am really excited because I can see your enthusiasm in connection with this topic. So in the meeting group chat, I would like to write my email address if it's possible. And if somebody has got any question or idea in this field of interest, we can discuss it.
Okay, thank you very much for the concise closing remarks and also the email address from Dr. Ildiko Orban. Yeah, every participant here who has a question or another discussion could continue via email. Okay, please allow me also to take some highlighted points from this today's session. Intangible assets, as the name implies, cannot be seen immediately, such as while looking at vehicles or an entity's facility. But that doesn't imply it does not exist. Intangible assets are particularly significant in some businesses since their role determines operational growth, such as Walt Disney and its cartoons character. As a result, understanding of intangible assets is required by enterprise so that relevant and meaningful information about intangible assets can be presented to shareholders while also increasing the quality of the company's financial reporting. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express our appreciation for our speakers' informative and interesting presentation today. Thank you once again, Doctor, for sharing your expertise with us today. Your insights have provided us a valuable perspective on the complexities of measurements and recognition of intangible assets. We eagerly anticipate further contribution and research on this topic from you in the future. Thank you also to all the participants for their active participation. Finally, please give applause for the speakers and for you all. Thank you very much. I'm returning the time to our lovely Master of Ceremony, Ibu Devi. Please take the time, it's yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Mera. It is a very exciting discussion sessions. Please kindly give a big applause to our outstanding speakers and moderator. And now it is the time for us to present the certificate of appreciation for our speaker and moderator. To the Honorable Professor Wayan, we give the time to you. The speaker, Professor, your speaker is still off.
Sorry. This presentation is a good presentation, a good knowledge for my student, for bachelor and doctor. Dr. Ildiko, thank you very much. I hope I am giving you certificate of appreciation. Hopefully, it will be the starting point for our collaboration. Udayana University and Debrecen University. Thank you very much for Dr. Ildiko. Okay, thank you, Dewi.
Thank you very much, Professor. Before we close today's webinar, we would like to inform our distinguished attendees to kindly feel the attention, please. Have you seen in the chat? And it's been a productive and inspiring time we spent together this afternoon or this morning in Hungary. And this is the end of the international webinar, Intangible Assets in the 21st Century, Faculty of Economic and Business, Udayana University. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Go Zonom to Dr. Orban Ildiko
Köszönöm.
for your kind presence, and we will see you in the next event. Om Santi 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 Om. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, nama budaya, salam kebajikan.
Awal dari sebuah perjuangan, gapai cita-cita dan harapan, terbang kenangan menembus awan, untuk jadi yang terdepan. Hilangkan semua keraguan, pastikan langkah untuk meraih masa depan. Ayo, ayo kawan, mari wujudkan impian. Bukalah wawasan.
Terima kasih buat teman-teman yang sudah mengikuti sesi webinar kali ini. Jangan lupa isi daftar kehadiran teman-teman dan dapatkan sertifikatnya ya. Thank you for
Dokter.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
hopefully you can join us in Bali, Doctor, next time.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Yes, in Uluwatu Beach.